Bill's here. Brian, whoever, just let us know when you want us to unmute.
Oh, you're unmuted now, so
Disregard.
have fun.
Good evening, everyone. Here for the Board of Public Utilities and City Council review of the utilities budgets. The people that responded said that they're going to be here are here. There's maybe one or two missing, but for the most part, everybody looks like they're on the list. If you have a question during the meeting, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up and ask a question as we go through this. If you're not speaking, then please try to stay muted so that we don't have any background or distracting noises. If you can't hear me for some reason, or
Rachel's waving her hand.
You are really hard to hear, Brian. If you could try and speak right into the microphone, I'm sorry.
if I get any closer, I'll be eating the microphone. Is that any better?
That is, but you don't take your mask off on my account.
Are you okay, Bill? Okay. Everybody hear me okay? Okay. All right, well, Dave, can you pull up the presentation?
Sure.
I assume that's being shared, Dave? We'll share this our screen in a second. Okay. Can everybody see that? All right, I'm going to assume that you can. If you cannot, then please unmute yourself and speak up, and we'll try to correct it. But so the first budget item we'll go through is the Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund, and just some budget assumptions that we put together for this fund. And just remind everybody, this is income tax dollars that are collected from employment in the city, and then get diverted into the Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund. So for 2020, this current year, our income tax revenues are expected to decrease by about $400,000, which is about 7.8% below their original budget expectations. But this is obviously due to the COVID impacts. We did reduce 2020 expenses below that amount to try to offset the reduction in revenue. We didn't know what that was going to be, so we did anticipate higher numbers than the $400,000. So for 2021, we did use numbers that were provided by Brian Bouchon, and we're looking at numbers that are closer to the 2019 actual numbers. This is about 2.6% below our 2020 budget numbers. Just some other items that are part of this fund. We are looking at an EDA grant. That's an Economic Development Administration grant through the federal government. This is for the Woodbridge Business Park expansion. We'll talk more about that later. And as usual, we also have some debt service payments that comes out of this fund for previous loans or bonds that we borrow money to pay for projects. This slide just shows you what our estimated balances are in this fund at the beginning of the year. In January 1st of 21, we're having a balance of $7.3 million. This just gives you a highlight or a high view of the revenues and the expenses that we're expecting or projecting in 21. And an estimated balance at the end of December of 21 at $2.6 million. Sorry. This slide shows our budget receipts. The biggest dollars you'll see coming into this fund come from the federal aid line, that $1.3 million. That's the EDA grant that I talked about for the Woodbridge Business Park expansion. The other dollar amount you'll see at $2.2 million, that's a bond or bond revenue. That is money for the city administration building that we discussed with city council and the board in the previous year. EDA loans, that's the Ohio Water Development Authority. Loan dollars that we get for water and sewer infrastructure projects, whether they be at the water treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant, or for a collection or distribution project that's within the pipe system or the sewer system. And then the last one is income tax at $5 million. Again, this is the 2.6% below 2020 budget number. You can see last year we were estimating $5.1 million, so a slight reduction there. The next slide shows our expected expenditures for this fund. Buildings at $12.8 million, that covers the majority of our a lot of our capital expense projects. We'll cover some of those a little bit later. Infrastructure again at $6.9 million. Those are also in other infrastructure and capital projects, obviously. Bond principal interest payments and loan principal interest payments. The loans typically loans that we would get from OWDA or again water plant, wastewater plant, or other projects. The reduction you see there from 2020 to 21 in loans, we had a loan that was paid off from the wastewater treatment plant. So that's why you see a reduction in the loan value. The increase you see in bonds, that is mostly due to the added expense or debt payment that would be incurred if a city building is constructed. This next slide covers our debt schedule. So these are all past projects that have been constructed or projects that we're expecting to construct in 21. And we would have some type of a debt payment in this fund. So you can see we've listed them here. We also give the final payment year at the end of each project. mostly projects have been on the books for several years now, so we just continue to make debt payments out of this fund for the projects that are on this list. And the next page, this right here, shows you the continuation of debt that we have out of this fund. The two projects at the bottom, the city administration building, again, that's that 92,000. That is the debt payment for a bond. If one were sold for the estimated construction costs, that's what the water and sewer portion would be. You'll see more on this later under the electric fund. The village water line replacement, the village subdivision is north of Poe Road and just west of the high school. And on the west side, it's bounded by a Brim Road. So that subdivision in there, we found that there's some need for water maintenance and water line repair. And so if we wanted to do the entire project in 1 year, we would look to acquire a loan through the WDA. And this would be an annual payment that we would pay towards that project if it's done. The next slide, again, shows you some capital improvement projects that we have planned for 21. First one listed is the city administration building at $2.2 million. That is not the total cost of the project. That's just the water and sewers portion of that project. That would include engineering and construction. The water distribution projects, that includes a lot of projects we've included on, like, say, West Wooster Street. Also the projects that are in the EDA grant, which I discussed earlier for the Woodbridge expansion. So some of that money, while it is showing up here as an expense, we would get some money back to cover some of these costs. Wastewater collection projects, those are sewer projects we do in the collection system. And there's a more detailed breakdown of those two items in the others within your budget packet. The water and sewer capital improvement fund. There's a list of other projects we're looking at doing in 21. So if anybody has any questions about, what makes up $4.1 million for water distribution and $2.8 million for wastewater collection, you can see a detailed breakdown of those projects in your budget packet. The other projects are things, again, are in that detailed breakdown. We're looking at upgrading the low service pump station at the water treatment plant. This is the original pump station that comes out of the Maumee River and feeds water into the reservoir. The carbon dioxide system, that design work is completed, and we'll be looking to get that project out for bid. Don't look to have a purchase order issued until 21, most likely. So that's why it's in this budget. Water tower improvements, that's just to take one of our southern water towers, either the western water tower or the tower at Carter Park, and repaint, perform some maintenance items that need to be addressed. The WPC, that's the water pollution control. The blower improvements project, we've discussed this with the board, and the city councils have already approved this project to go forward. It has been sold for a construction contract, and we're looking to begin construction hopefully later this year, if not in January. Electrical upgrades have also been discussed with the Board of Utilities at a previous meeting. That's $620,000, and so we're not expecting to get that those purchased this year. We're hoping to get them ordered. Some of them, because of the lead time, may come in later, and so that's why we put it into the 21 budget. And then the odor control at Poe Mercer Pump Station. We did pilot some equipment several months ago, maybe up to a year ago, to help with odor issues that we have experienced at the Poe Mercer intersection. There's a large pump station there that takes most of the wastewater from the west side of 75 and it pumps it to the plant on the east side of 75. And that station can experience odors at that intersection. And so we looked to install some equipment that would help to reduce or help to control those odors in 21. Again, as note at the bottom says, there's a more detailed, complete list in your budget packet. The next slide here is there a question? Okay. This slide shows just a budget summary to wrap up the Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund here. So we do look to have a stable budget for 21, and we also have a 5-year projection for this fund that looks like it's in pretty good shape. The debt payments are 45% of the annual income tax revenues. Now, this has been as high as 60% in previous years, and as we've paid off projects or debt has fallen off, that percentage continues to go down. I think last year we were closer to 50% of the debt payments to income tax revenues. We have utilized 0% interest loans from EPA or OWDA when possible. So those are typically for microsystem or harmful algae blooms, those kind of projects that can benefit us for those kind of treatment processes and qualify for 0% interest. Try to leverage that to some degree at the wastewater plant. They can help if it qualifies again under the OWDA and OEPA guidelines, and we try to use those low interest loans. Currently, we have 6 projects that have 0% interest, and we're trying to get one more. Pump station number 1 project we believe would qualify and meets the HAB criteria, so that we could have a future one at 0%. 80% of the Woodbridge expansion will be covered by the EDA grant. That means that out of that project, the utilities funds about $1.3 million would be covered by the EDA grant if we get 80% funding for that. Are there any questions for anybody on the Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund before I go on?
Brian, I have two. First question, you mentioned the village water line replacement. Would that involve any street reconstruction?
The details haven't been worked out exactly where that water line would be placed right now. So we've done some cost estimates based on previous projects that we've done and what we typically find to be construction costs and the length of pipe that is out there to be replaced. The problem becomes can't take the current line out of service because people still need to have access to water, and so you have to put the new water line somewhere that it can be constructed and put in operation before the old line is, before people are converted to the new line. So the right of way in the village is fairly narrow. It's not quite as wide as we would get in a newer subdivision. And so we have to make sure we're maintaining separation from storm sewers, from sanitary sewers, gas lines that might be in the area. So it's possible that that water line will have to be placed in the pavement to maintain those clearances. I can't tell you for sure exactly where that would be, and every road might be a little different because the sewer might be on the north side on some streets, might be on the south side or east side in other streets. And just the arrangement is going to have to be looked at to figure that out. So,
if you can remember,
sure.
As the plans firm up.
Sure, no problem.
The second question, when you talk about maintenance on the water tower, as an example, the Carter Park one, the painting that you mentioned, is that strictly exterior painting, or will the interior where the water is also have to be recoated?
We have an inspection company that comes in and does annual inspections on paint on the inside of the is a pretty good condition. There's sometimes where it needs a little bit of a touch up here and there if something is degrading. The majority of those costs would come from painting the outside of the towers, but also some additional access, hand railings, those types of things, fall protections. Those are the areas where we need to maybe up to to current codes, what the current standards would be. And so the majority of the cost really would be in the painting inside the tower.
And you said that it's annual inspection to see if the inside needs paint.
Yeah, we have a company that comes in, they look at all the water towers and they give us reports on here's what needs to be done, and here's what, can we wait, a while. And this project, if you looked in past budgets, this project has been hanging on for some time now. We've had other priorities that have popped up, and not the water tower is not a priority, but just other things tend to become more of a hot button than the water tower does, given its current condition. So we're hoping to get it done this year because we know it's been hanging out there, and the goal would be to do one water tower this year. Next year we would do the other one and have similar upgrades and improvements to both towers. But do the projects over 2 years, or maybe spread them out over a couple of years versus doing both of them in 1 year and having a large expense.
Just as clarification, since you do have a come out every year, it therefore shows that it is a priority to maintain the inside of the tank.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But any other questions on the water and sewer capital improvement fund before I move on? Okay. So next we'll go over the utilities revenue and capital reserve funds. So these are not income tax dollars from this point forward. These are all going to be dollars that are collected from ratepayers and customers that use electric, water, and sewer services. So this slide shows some budget assumptions, which covers all of the funds, electric, water, and wastewater. So we have 26 pay periods. Last year we had 27, which added some costs and expenses to our budget. Our salary adjustments will be based on historical averages. We do have an increase in our medical insurance, no change in dental. Life insurance has a slight decrease. And we have 11 retirees with potential payoffs in 21. And then as usual, the investment income that comes from utility funds is transferred to the general fund. Next slide again shows some budget assumptions that are specific to the electric revenue and electric capital reserve funds. So for the electric funds, we do have a rate adjustment in July of 21 for the board approved rate schedule. And this would be the year 5 of a 5-year rate plan. So it's the last one we have planned right now on the books. We would look to collect and reimburse $1.2 million from in-corp kilowatt tax. That money gets transferred to the general fund. For the refuse and recycling charges that utilities collects on the utility bills, we're showing that to be about $995,000. And then we would look to transfer $6.1 million from the electric revenue fund to the electric capital reserve fund, and that money is to pay for capital projects that are related to electric utility. I would just note here that 3.3 million of that could be for the city administration building. We'll talk more about that later. Also for this fund, out of the previous employees we're talking about retiring, we have 2 employees to retire potentially in 21 for electric. Some additional budget assumptions. These are somewhat related to COVID. So in 2020, the kilowatt hour sales were down about 9% through September due to COVID there. Kilowatt hour sales mostly recovered in July. That each month has been more consistent with past usage. What we saw, say for April, May, and even into June. So that's a good thing. I would estimate that if the year continues as normal, as we've typically seen in most years, that 9% would probably drop to 6 or 7% as far as kilowatt hour sales go. So we're not gonna get back to being made whole, but each month that we have a better month or more typical month, that percentage should decrease. The sales estimates for commercial and industrial, we used the 2018 and 2019 data, and that was because commercial and industrial really were hit the hardest when it comes to kilowatt hour sales in 2020 due to COVID. They saw the largest reductions in those accounts or those rates. Sorry, those customer classes. And then the residential and other customer classes, we're going to use our typical 3-year usage data for 18, 19, and 20 because they didn't show or didn't experience drastic changes due to COVID. Residential, for the most part, people were staying home, so they may have actually seen a slight increase in 2020. And some of those people may still be at home at this time, maybe 21 possibly. So. This next slide is going to talk about purchase power costs. So typically we use our power supply usage expenses and revenues are based on a couple of different items here. We have our historical usage we look at. We have projections by Sullivan Associates, which is our third-party rate consultant and power supply consultant. AMP gives us some data for this. Then we also have our current rate plan that the board has approved that goes into these factors. So for 2020, so for this year, our PCA, and for those that don't know, our PCA is our power cost adjustment factor. And this is an item that we track, and we can be under collected or over collected at the end of the year. Typically, when I first started in this job, we were over collected, and as costs have gone up, we've gone to an under collected status. But we've adjusted rates to try to account for that, and that's what the 5-year rate plan that the board approved was trying to target, was to make sure that the power cost adjustment factor was collecting enough revenue from customers to cover power supply expenses. So for this year, again, we are looking at an under collection of $3.6 million. These dollars would be transferred in the 2021 budget, and we do this every February with the Board of Utilities. We come back to the board with the previous year's under collection or over collection, and those dollars are then either added to our that current year's power supply costs, or they help to reduce our current year's power supply costs if it's an over collection from the previous year situation. The under collection increased in 2020, obviously due to the decrease in sales revenue from COVID. The number that we had estimated in 2020 was hoped to be $500,000, and so you can see we're at 3.6 million. So that's quite a jump from the $500,000 that we'd estimated to be under collected by. But I don't want to cause any panic at this point in time. I'll explain more why we think we're still okay with our current PCA at 0 and not increasing that to some value that would collect money. The PCA is a factor that can be applied to every utility bill, and every customer would pay a rate or $1 per kilowatt hour based on their consumption. And so that's a rate that we could charge that would collect money and go into power supply costs to try to resolve that under collection. But we don't believe we're going to need to change that PCA. If we did modify that PCA to some number above 0, then obviously that's a rate increase for all customers. And I'll show you in this next slide that we think we're going to be okay to leave that at 0. So this slide shows our previous under collections and our future under or over collection. So if the number is in parentheses, that's an over collection. And if it's not in parentheses, then that's an under collection. And these dollars get transferred to the next year. and the money is then collected from customers in the next year. So you can see that in previous years, we were about 1.6 million in 18, 1.2 million in 19, and that reduction was planned to continue to decrease until we got to an over collection status, as you're seeing here in 22. Due to COVID and the reduced sales that we experienced, of course, the PCA under collection went up to $3.6 million. We are estimating it and budgeting in 21 that the PCA under collection will go down to 1.5 million. And then again, this is with our current rate structure. In 22, we're estimating an over collection of $1 million. And so you can see that by basically keeping the same rate plan that we have, not changing the PCA beyond zero, which is good for customers, that we will come out of this under collection status in 22. If COVID had not occurred, this the plan of the budget last year showed that we would have been in a over collection status in 21 by $400,000 to $500,000. But again, because of COVID, this has been delayed a year, and we are where we are. So the good thing is with our current rates, we believe that we still meet our debt service obligations. Part of a joint venture or JV projects through AMP, and we'll maintain a high credit score, which is important for borrowing. Moody's and those kinds of financial rating agencies will want to see that when they go to borrow. This next slide basically says that one option we have is if we wanted to zero out the PCA and make it zero in 21, we could borrow $1.5 million from AMP, and we had a plan to do that back in 2014. To date, as I think I mentioned in previous budget meetings, we have not borrowed any money from AMP to stabilize or levelize rates. We don't see any point in doing that now and taking on additional debt and making interest payments on that money, especially since our projections show that in 22 we'll be in an over collection status and be in a much better position. We anticipate purchase power costs in 21 should be stable, with some variation from PJM capacity and first energy transmission charges. And those are two charges that make up about $1 million per month of our power supply bill, about 25% of our cost. And we really can't affect those charges in any way because they get passed down to us from PJM or from First Energy. Again, our current rate plan appears to be adequate for purchase power costs through 22. And we plan to perform a cost of service and rate study in 22. Again, we think our current plan is to have a rate increase that the board has already approved by 21. We think that rate would get us obviously through the rest of 21 and then into 22. And that's why we're proposing to show a rate study in 22. And this could help us to not necessarily look at, not just do we need to increase rates, and rates seem to be pretty stable going forward from our power supply makeup. But do we have costs and revenue collections from the right customer classes in the right amounts? And so, is large industrial subsidizing residential or vice versa, or is commercial subsidizing somebody else, and have some rebalancing of those rates? And we see that same thing in our sewer and our water cost of service studies that we do. Sometimes the rates are close to what they need to be, but there's an imbalance based on the cost that a certain customer class puts onto the system. This is showing you more detail about the PJM capacity and the First Energy transmission charges. And this includes credits that we get on our bill from projects where we are owner or a subscriber to the project. You can see in 21, we're projecting it to be 5.9 million, so a slight decrease from 2020 numbers. And then in 22 is looking to go up to 7.1 million. The reason for the decrease in 21, we're projected to get a slightly higher credit in 21 for our power supply projects where we are a participant or an owner. And the reason for the increase in 22 is that we're expecting to see higher, just higher rates from PJM and First Energy for their PJM has an auction that they go through every 3 years, and First Energy just based off of what they think they're going to build within their transmission system, and so those costs fluctuate annually. But that's the reason for the increase in the changes from year to year. So we don't have a lot of control over what those numbers are. But these numbers don't appear to fluctuate greatly compared to the power supply costs overall. And if the bulk of the costs come from our other power supply resources, that those are fairly stable. That's why we're saying that overall the power supply costs going forward should be relatively stable, should be fairly normal from year to year. And the slight variation that you see in these numbers is what I referred to earlier about some variation in capacity and transmission charges. If there's no questions, moving on. This is our electric revenue fund, which again, this does include power supply costs. So our estimated balance is in the beginning of the year is looking at about $25 million. Revenues of $64.6 million. Expenses at $67.5 million. That's where power supply costs will be included. And then at the end of the year, our fund balance is looking to be around $22 million. A little more detail on the revenues or the budget receipts. And just for people's references, the 2020 numbers I'm showing there, that's really just for some comparisons for the board and for city council to look at to say, well, where were these numbers at last year and where are they at this year? And so you will see some slight variations because there's a lot of numbers that go into these lines. But for the most part, I think what you'll see for the remainder of the budget items is they're fairly consistent and fairly typical from 2020 to 2021. Slight differences here and there, but for the most part, they're going to be fairly similar. This slide shows our expenditures or our costs. Again, this covers salaries and fringes. That's staff employment costs there. Contractual services, pretty similar to 2020 years. The $51.9 million, that's the purchase power costs that I discussed earlier. And the rest of the items are really very similar, except for the transfer to capital reserve at $6.1 million. And the reason for the increase really is the city administration building project. I'll talk more about that when I get into the capital reserve funds. So this is now the capital reserve funds, and so we'll get into these. The balance at the beginning of the year was $2 million. Revenues of $6.1 million and expenses will match that at $6.1 million. And so the cash balance at the end of the year is equal to what it was at the beginning of the year. Again, this is just a breakdown of some detail of what is included here. The bond anticipation note was paid off in 2020. The transfer from electric revenue fund for the receipts into this fund is $6.1 million. And then the expenditures, the capital outlay at $6.1 million. This slide shows the capital improvement projects which are included in that $6.1 million. Again, the biggest cost is the city administration building at $3.3 million. And this is just the electric's portion for the project. As I mentioned, with the water and sewer fund, we were looking to borrow money or sell a bond for the water and sewers portion and then pay debt service on that. Because of the cash balance in the electric fund, we would look to use cash reserves for this payment and not borrow money from the on the bond to cover electric's portion. So that's why you see the decrease in the cash reserves in this fund. The other projects there, we have a substation transformer. We didn't perform this in 2020 due to COVID. So we held off on some capital projects and different funds because we didn't really know where revenue was going to be at, where sales are going to be. So this is a carryover from last year, really. So we have a multi-year plan for large transformer replacements in our substations. So you'll probably see this going into future years past this year. Other substation improvements we have there is just equipment and controls, maybe some building maintenance we need to do in the substations within our electric system. Underground boring is putting in conduits for pulling underground cables throughout the system. The other items are pretty typical inventory that's probably there. And then we have several vehicles we'd like to replace, a bucket truck, pickup truck, and then some other equipment for electric division. As a summary for the electric revenue and the capital reserve funds, we're looking at a cash reserve reduction of about $2.9 million. That's due to the one-time capital projects, but there's the cash balance right now remains at acceptable levels. We're not concerned about that. Looking to maintain the board-approved rate plan for 21, and we're also looking to maintain the PCA at $0 per kilowatt hour. But Jackie and I, of course, will monitor this, the PCA throughout the year of 21 to look for improvements in that under collection number to see if we're going to be close to our target of that 1.5 million. This slide shows our historical cash balances and also our 6-month reserve. We have a 6-month reserve policy in electric due to our financial policy of not including our purchase power cost in this, and that's why you see this steep decline from 16 to 17 is because the cash reserve policy changed. Prior to 2016, we included purchase power costs in our cash reserve requirements, and by having a PCA calculation, we convinced AMP and the rating agencies to let us remove that from our cash reserve requirements. And so that lower line you see from 17 on is really just looking at the expenses that we have that are outside of power supply. That increase you see at the end of the chart there in 21, and that's due to the capital expense project of the city building. That's a one-time expense. That's the last slide for electric. So, any questions about electric? Okay. The next slide we'll go to, the next fund will be the water revenue and the capital reserve funds. So some budget assumptions that we have used for the water funds include the 2020 sales we've seen so far do not appear to be impacted by COVID. What we saw was a slight decrease in industrial and some commercial sales, but residential and wholesale customers offset that difference. And we also had some reduced spending due to COVID. We did try to cut back on spending, and so you'll see that later on the graph for the projection of cash. The cash balances went up. So several factors went into that, but for budgeting purposes, we use the 2018 and 2019 data for commercial and industrial customers. Again, they were the most affected by COVID in 2020, so we wanted those numbers out and not include those in our budget. The residential and wholesale customers, we did use 18, 19, and 20 data because they did not negative impact due to COVID. Again, some other budget assumptions here for the board has approved a rate schedule or rate adjustments in year 4 of a 5-year rate plan, and that rate adjustment occurs in April. The electric was in July. The water adjustment would be in April. We're looking to transfer $730,000 from the water revenue fund to the water capital reserve fund. And again, that would be to cover capital expenses or capital projects. We did look to add 1 position in distribution and collection. This would be a 50-50 split in water and sewer. And we're looking at 4 employee retirements in the water funds. This is a high level of the beginning and ending balances for the water revenue fund. Looking at $6.1 million in January, revenues coming in at $6.8 million for the year, and expenses of $6.7 million, and the 21 ending balance is projected to be $6.2 million. Some more detail on our receipts and revenue. Again, very similar to 2020, it's a little increase in the sales projection. That could be due to the rate adjustment that's done. The other numbers are really very consistent with previous years. Expenses. Again, salaries and fringes, that's employment, that's staff. The slight increase you see in supplies and materials, that was mostly due to chemicals that are used at the water treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant. We're also looking to do some additional lime removal testing on some alternative ways that we can remove lime sludge from the water plant. But overall, the remaining funds, the remaining lines in this, on the expenses are pretty consistent from last year. Moving on to the water capital reserve funds, this is all capital projects here. The fund currently has a balance of $2.3 million, looking to transfer in $700,000, expenses at $1 million, and so the estimated balance is $2 million. That's just a little more breakdown on the capital reserve fund receipts and expenses. So the bond anticipation note at $100,000 in 2020 got paid off, and so that's not there in 21. The transfer from the water revenue fund at $730,000, that's to cover capital projects. And the capital outlay at $1 million again is for capital projects. These are some of the projects we're looking to do in 21. So every year we set aside money to cover replacement of the reverse osmosis membranes and also the microfiltration membranes. So this is the year that we planned for the actual replacement of the reverse osmosis portion of this. So that's $400,000. On the microfiltration side, this is an annual set aside, so we're not looking to spend that money, but we're going to transfer it into the capital fund because we know in a couple of years the media or the membrane that's in the microfiltration system will need to be replaced, and so this is trying to ensure that we'll have enough funds in the capital reserve fund when that year gets here. The other items are pretty typical from year to year. Inventory is pretty standard. The RF meter, water meter transponders. This is for water meters that are outside of the city, but we still have to read those meters, and we don't have an electric meter in the area to pick up a water meter. Right now, our water meters are read through talk to our electric meter, and that data comes back through the electric meter. So if you're not an electric customer, then we need to change the way we're reading those water meters. And so you'll see a line here for about $110,000. And we also see this, a similar cost on the sewer side, because when we bill for water, we typically bill for sewer. So we split that cost 50-50. The other items at the bottom is replacing some vehicles and their equipment, either at the water plants or in the distribution division. Some assumptions for the water revenue and the capital reserve fund. Looking to reduce cash reserve by $239,000, but they're still at acceptable levels for the expenses that we've got. And we have seen some cash reserves increase over the past 4 years, and that is shown on this slide. You can kind of see in 2020, we're projecting or estimating a pretty healthy increase in cash reserves, and we believe a lot of that is due to COVID. And we did not see negative sales due to COVID, but we did reduce spending because we weren't sure where that was going to end up. And so by reducing spending, having sales being stronger than what we anticipated, that's why we kind of see a more increasing line in 2020. Any questions about the water revenue fund or water capital reserve fund? Okay. Moving on to the sewer revenue and the sewer capital reserve funds. Again, starting with some budget assumptions. Sewer also, like the water side, did not appear to be negatively impacted by COVID. Sales are really pretty good for the year. We did reduce expenses, reduce spending in 20 to try to offset what we thought were going to be some reductions, but we didn't see that. We did see some reductions in commercial and industrial, so we only used their 2018 and 2019 to put the 21 budget together. We did not see negative impacts in residential and wholesale customers in 18, 19. And we're using annualized 2020 numbers here because sewer numbers don't tend to fluctuate as much throughout the year as much as water and electric does. So that's how we put together our sales estimates. Again, budget assumptions, we're not proposing any rate adjustments in 21. The last rate adjustment that the board had approved was back in January of 2020. Looking to transfer $580,000 from the sewer revenue fund to the sewer capital reserve fund. We are looking to add a chief operator position at the water pollution control of the wastewater treatment plant. This will help us with succession planning at the facility. Again, we're looking to add one distribution and collection operator split 50-50 with water and sewer. And we have 3 employee retirements in the sewer funds. In just high level, the balance in the sewer revenue fund at the beginning of the year, we had $3.2 million. Revenue estimated at $5.1 million. That's $5.7 million. And estimated balance in December 31, $2.7 million. Just a little more detail, a little more breakdown on the receipts or the revenue side. Sales very similar to 2020. You do see a little increase in the merchandising and contract work, $568,000. That is due to some revenue that we received from industrial customers for extra strength surcharge. When they send us wastewater that exceeds our acceptable limit, we can charge an additional fee for that to treat that water. And so what we're seeing is an increase in those extra strength surcharge sales. The decrease you see in the other line item, getting down to $46,000, that's due to in 2020, we transferred money into this fund from if you were around back then, we had the gasoline rotary fund, and those dollars were transferred into the sewer fund. And Obviously, that's a one-time transfer, so you don't see that in 21. And so that's why there's a reduction in the other line item. Next slide shows our expenses. You see a slight increase in salaries and fringes, and that's largely due to the adding a chief operator at the wastewater treatment plant. The other items in here are very consistent and very typical to what we had from last year. So moving on to the sewer capital reserve fund. This balance, at the beginning of the year, is looking at $457,000. Revenues and expenses at $582,000. Again, the end of the year balance looking to be the same at $457,000. Just some more detailed breakdown of this. Again, receipts and expenditures. The bond anticipation note for sewer was at $100,000. Again, was paid off in 2020. So all that's left in 21 is the transfer from the sewer revenue fund into the capital reserve fund. And this is a list of the projects, the capital improvement projects we're looking to do in the sewer capital reserve fund. Again, the RF water meter transponders, that's the same amount that we showed in the water capital reserve fund at $110,000. The equipment we're looking to replace be the dump trucks and the vacuum trucks. The sewer lateral replacement, that's some work in the downtown area that we need to do in some alley areas. So our collection staff is looking to do that work in 21. As a summary for the sewer revenue and the sewer capital reserve fund, looking to see a reduction of about $566,000 in cash reserves, but we still believe this is acceptable for the expenses that we see. Cash reserves have increased over the past 3 years, and that's mostly again due to the cautious spending, rate adjustments, and then higher sales for extra strength surcharge. Our cost of service study is underway right now. We'll probably be talking to the board about that in the near future or into the next year, very early in the next year. And again, at this point, we're not planning to have any rate increases in 21. And this shows our historical cash balance and our reserve margins at 3 months and 6 months. You see the decrease there at the in 21. The increase in expenses, that's really due to the capital projects that we have planned. We saw the same thing in last year's budget because of the capital projects we had planned. But nothing out of the ordinary would strike us as much different than the other funds. This is the last fund. I'm sorry, are there any questions about the sewer revenue or sewer capital fund? Okay. This is the last fund we have, and this is an underground storage tank guarantee fund. This is a fund that's maintained per ordinance 35.17. We looked to donate this fund earlier this year. Because of the ordinance, we were not able to do so. So we did get rid of some other funds. If you recall, there was an underground storage tank fund that we eliminated. There was a gasoline rotary fund that we got rid of, and also a natural gas rotary fund that was eliminated. So this is the last one that remains. No expenses and no revenues for this fund. And that's all I have. So I just want to thank everybody that worked on the budgets for utilities. That's enough to say that, as I've said in past years, Jackie Spangenberg spends a great deal of time, as well as the lieutenants, but Jackie's really the one that puts all this together, and I'm thankful that she's around to to do this work for us, because she's a big help for this, so appreciate her. Also appreciate the board and city council attending today. If anybody has any questions, we're looking to take those now, or if you have questions after the fact, if you want to send me an email or a call, we can address those as needed.
These really are thanks as well. For all
Sure.
the hard work that you and your staff have done.
Sure. Okay, well, no questions are being asked here. I don't hear any from the online crowd, so thanks for your attendance and have a great night. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
I guess one thing I learned from this is that people have to flush their toilets